What if melting glaciers could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the Vikings and warn us about our own future? A few years ago, a Norwegian hiker spotted something glinting in the melting snow, a Viking sword, untouched for 1,000 years. High above the Arctic Circle, glaciers, those ancient rivers of ice that carve mountains and shape continents, are retreating faster than ever before. As they shrink, the ground is giving up secrets once thought lost forever. Viking outposts, ship timbers, even more ancient weapons are emerging from the ice, evidence of a world shaped and shattered by the power of climate, both then and now. These frozen clues are changing everything we thought we knew about how the Vikings survived. What pushed the Vikings to the very edges of the known world, and what ultimately drove them back? The answers aren't in sagas or battle scars, but locked within melting ice and the fragile clues beneath. Was it war, famine, or something deeper? A changing climate that opened new frontiers, then closed them forever. Today on Armchair Archaeology, we'll trace how melting glaciers shaped the rise and fall of Viking civilization. And at the end, a single artifact, frozen for 1,000 years, will challenge everything we thought we knew about the North's most legendary people, and about our own future. Before we begin, if you love exploring history's hidden connections, where ancient lives meet the forces of nature, subscribe to Armchair Archaeology. Each artifact we uncover is a piece of a much bigger story, and I'd love for you to join me as we keep putting the past back together. If you picture the Viking Age, you might imagine fearless explorers in fur and iron, carving their path through a land of endless snow. But what few realize is that the fate of the Vikings was always tied to the rhythm of the glaciers themselves. The North wasn't a place of permanent, unyielding winter. Instead, it was a land in motion, shaped by periods of warming and cooling that set the boundaries of every Viking dream. The climate was never just a backdrop, it was the main stage, sometimes opening new doors, sometimes slamming them shut. Around the year 800, the climate shifted. Glaciers began to recede, revealing valleys and shorelines that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. For the Vikings, each summer's melt opened up a little more of their world. New ground meant fresh pastures, better farmland, and possibilities for settlement. Where their grandparents saw only forbidding walls of blue ice, a new generation saw opportunity. But here's what shocked historians. Why were Viking beads made from desert sands turning up in frozen outposts? Archaeologists have found the evidence written right into the landscape. In Norway's high mountain regions, where the ice once ruled, remains of Viking hunting camps and temporary shelters have appeared as the glaciers retreat. What's truly extraordinary is the preservation. A simple wooden plow and even a child's walking stick have emerged from the melt, almost untouched by time. One small leather shoe, found still bearing the impression of its young owner's foot, traveled across centuries in the deep freeze, only to reappear in our time. These aren't just museum pieces, they are direct links to individual lives and hopes carried on the edge of a changing world. The Viking legacy is quite literally frozen into the landscape, waiting for the right season to be revealed. As the glaciers yield their grip, the story of the North's most legendary people begins again with the power of the ice. As each season warmed and the glaciers withdrew, the North transformed beneath Viking eyes. Rivers that once disappeared beneath walls of ice began carving new paths through the valleys. Fjords that had been silent and blocked for centuries suddenly rang with the sound of axes on ship timbers and the cheers of crews setting out into open water. This new landscape offered not just adventure, but survival. Fresh pastures for livestock, new fishing grounds, and the chance to build lives where none had been possible before. The Vikings answered this invitation with ingenuity. Using their sturdy longships, they pushed along rivers and out into seas newly freed from ice. What started as cautious exploration quickly turned bold
as families and traders followed the melt to lands only recently uncovered: Iceland, Greenland, and even the far coast of North America. Along these new routes, small settlements and trading posts sprang up, woven into the changing map by necessity and hope. In the layers of earth and the remains of daily life at these outposts, the connections formed by the shifting ice become clear. Picture a Viking family as they first glimpse green valleys where only ice once stood. Would you risk everything to settle a place no one has seen in generations? Archaeologists have uncovered beads crafted from desert sands, coins that crossed half the known world, and delicate fragments of silk woven far to the east. These items, mixed among iron tools and simple pottery, show how Viking homes on the edge of the ice also became meeting places for cultures. Goods from distant markets found their way to hearts newly established on thawed ground, proof that the movement of glaciers could change not just the physical world, but the currents of trade, ideas, and lives. With each mile the ice released, the Vikings charted new paths, building a network of travel, commerce, and connection that reshaped their destiny. Have you ever wondered how far you'd go if the world suddenly gave you a blank map? For the Vikings, every summer brought new choices.
For the Viking settlers carving out homes in the north, freshwater was more precious than gold. Glaciers, far from being obstacles, became lifelines. As they melted, they sent streams of clear water cascading into valleys and meadows, turning rocky ground into green pastures. Each spring's thaw promised more than just softer earth. It brought the resources that made every harvest, every loaf of bread, and every family feast possible. Imagine staking your family's survival on the spring thaw, praying the ice above would melt just enough to keep your crops alive. With these new flows, Viking farmers took root in places where their ancestors could only dream of living. Fields of barley, rye, and oats spread across ground that had only recently seen sunlight. Livestock flourished in meadows fed by glacial melt, and small communities grew around the steady trickle of water from distant ice. Archaeological digs at old Viking farmsteads have revealed not just tools and pottery, but entire networks of irrigation channels, carefully dug to catch and carry the meltwater to crops. In some places, these channels still trace their way across the landscape, 1,000 years after the last Norse farmer shaped them with a wooden spade. In Iceland and Greenland, pollen samples from lake beds line up almost perfectly with periods of glacial retreat, showing clear bursts of farming as the water supply improved. It's here that everyday artifacts, simple wooden plows, bone-handled sickles, and leather harnesses turn up, left behind by those who worked the land as it came alive. These objects speak not of grand conquest, but of resilience and daily care, and of the vital partnership between the Vikings and the melting ice. Every Viking village owed its survival to the glaciers above. The steady gift of fresh water made possible not just farms and feasts, but the entire northern adventure itself. This careful partnership between the Vikings and their environment is one of the great untold stories of the ancient world. If you're curious about how other civilizations mastered or were undone by climate and technology, I've written more about it in Secrets of the Ancient World, Mysteries, Technologies, and Lost Civilizations. It's a deeper look at how ancient people solved challenges we're still facing today. You'll find the link in the pinned comment.
Here's a quick science break. The medieval warm period was a time between about 800 and 1200 when parts of the North Atlantic were as warm as, or warmer than today. This unexpected warmth changed everything. In fact, one Greenland farmhouse was so well built that archaeologists found its straw roof almost intact, a Viking mansion frozen in time. The Vikings' golden age was shaped by more than just bold voyages or iron weapons. It flourished in an era when nature offered a rare gift. Between 800 and 1200 CE, the North Atlantic entered what we now call the medieval warm period. Winters became gentler, summers stretched longer, and the boundaries of possibility for Norse communities expanded with every passing year. In these centuries, the North was transformed from a marginal frontier into a place where families could thrive. Across Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland, fields that had once been stunted by cold suddenly grew lush and green. Norse farmers raised larger herds of cattle, sheep, and goats, and built sturdier, more permanent homes. Excavations at ancient settlements in Greenland have uncovered the remnants of vast stone barns, byres, and animal enclosures, structures that could only have existed in a climate kind enough to support them. Layers of straw, animal bones, and the impressions of wooden posts speak to a time of abundance and careful planning. Social life grew richer too. With harvests more reliable and winters less threatening, families could invest in larger halls, better tools, and vibrant community gatherings. Carved wooden spoons, jewelry, and gaming pieces found at these sites show a daily life filled with both necessity and joy. In coastal villages, trade increased, and new routes were explored across the open sea. Norse sailors, emboldened by mild weather, reached as far as Newfoundland, establishing outposts on the very edge of the known world. For several generations, warmth and prosperity fed Viking ambition. This window of climate favor was the soil in which exploration, trade, and legendary tales all took root, shaping an age that would echo for centuries. Isn't it incredible how something as simple as a child's shoe or a carved wooden plow can survive 1,000 years waiting to rewrite history? If discoveries like this fascinate you and you want to help keep videos like this coming, consider dropping a super thanks. It's a small way to support the channel, but it makes a big difference.
The Vikings' golden window, sustained by years of warmth, began to close as the 13th century approached. Subtle shifts in wind and weather signaled the arrival of a new chapter, the Little Ice Age. Winters crept in earlier, springs arrived later, and the world grew colder year by year. Imagine being a farmer who suddenly faces endless frost and fields that never thaw. How long would you hold on before searching for hope somewhere else? Glaciers that had long retreated began to advance, reclaiming valleys and encroaching on farms that had once basked in gentle sun. For Viking communities, the change was as swift as it was unforgiving. In Greenland and across the North Atlantic, the first signs of struggle appeared in the fields. Crops that once flourished now failed in shorter, harsher seasons. Livestock suffered as pastures shrank and snow lingered. Archaeologists have uncovered abandoned farmhouses where storage pits still hold the last unused remnants of grain, evidence of harvests that never came. Stone barns and byres show signs of hasty repairs with timbers patched and repurposed as wood became scarce and sea ice made trade more difficult. Human remains in village refuse tell a stark story of adaptation and hardship. Isotope analysis from Viking skeletons reveals a shift in diet as people turn from cattle and crops to hunting seals and fishing when the land could no longer provide. Midden heaps, ancient trash piles, contain fewer bones of domestic animals and more from wild game, marking the desperate measures families took as resources dwindled. The struggle wasn't just against the elements, but against the ticking clock of a changing world. Despite their legendary resilience, the Vikings could not outlast the climate's relentless turn. The returning ice isolated their settlements and starved their fields, forcing hard choices and eventually abandonment. The landscape, once opened by warmth, now closed in with cold, and the Norse world grew smaller, one bitter season at a time.
As the cold deepened and glaciers advanced, the ties that once bound Viking settlements together began to unravel. For generations, ships had crossed open seas to carry goods, news, and people between Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland. But with each new winter, the waterways stayed frozen longer, and dangerous ice floes crowded the coastlines. Every new winter meant more frozen rivers, more treacherous ice, and fewer chances for ships to bring help. Journeys that had been routine became risky, then impossible, cutting off outposts from the support and supplies they desperately needed. The effects rippled through daily life. Trade that once brought iron, timber, and essentials from Europe dwindled to a trickle. In Greenland, the remains of farmhouses show how families struggled to make do. Wooden beams were salvaged and reused until they splintered, and iron nails became treasures worth hoarding. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of tools repeatedly repaired and household items fashioned from whatever materials could be found. Even small things like bits of soapstone or pieces of imported cloth became prized possessions in a world growing more isolated by the season. Middens from this period show a shift in what people ate too.
With grain and livestock hard to come by, families turned to fishing, seal hunting, and gathering whatever the land and sea could offer. The lack of imported goods is echoed in churches and homes. Ornate objects from earlier decades disappear, replaced by simpler, handmade substitutes. A bishop's staff, meant to link Greenland's faithful to the wider Christian world, was found abandoned in a church after contact was lost, a poignant reminder of how isolation touched every aspect of Viking life. As the trade routes froze and communities grew ever more cut off, the world that the Vikings had built on connection and exchange slowly began to collapse. Ice didn't just close the sea, it narrowed the boundaries of survival itself. When the cold tightened its grip and trade routes faltered, many Viking families faced an impossible choice: struggle on with dwindling resources, or abandon the homes their ancestors had built. Across Greenland and the North Atlantic, traces of these final years linger in the ruins left behind, mute witnesses to a slow, heartbreaking retreat. What had once been thriving farmsteads and villages were gradually surrendered to the advancing ice and the unyielding elements. Archaeologists uncover this story not in grand monuments, but in the everyday objects left where they fell. In Greenland's deserted farmhouses, tools rest on benches as if waiting for hands that never returned, and storage pits still hold the last meager stores of food. Soil studies and pollen records confirm the land itself was exhausted. Fields once cultivated with care were reclaimed by wild grasses and moss. Even the churches, built with such pride and effort, lost their congregations, their walls slowly buckling under the weight of snow and time. The final generations tried to adapt, shifting from farming to sealing and fishing, but the evidence suggests these strategies could only delay the inevitable. Analysis of bones from this period reveals the toll of malnutrition and illness. Graves grow smaller and more isolated, often marked by signs of hurried or improvised burials, a silent record of communities shrinking and vanishing. If you walked through these abandoned homes today, you'd see tools left on tables and storage pits still holding the last meager grains, silent witnesses to dreams cut short. By the late 1400s, Norse voices had faded from Greenland. The wind and ice swept over empty homesteads, erasing the last traces of a centuries-old society. Today, the scattered ruins and abandoned fields are reminders that even the most resilient cultures can be undone by forces far beyond their control, and that survival sometimes means knowing when to let go. The Vikings' struggle with climate change feels eerily familiar, doesn't it? Rising seas, shifting weather, broken trade networks. It's a pattern we've seen before. If you were a Viking watching the world turn colder and harsher, would you have stayed and adapted, or left everything behind for a better chance somewhere else? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading your theories.
The story of the Vikings and their struggle with climate isn't locked in the distant past. It's being replayed in new forms before our eyes. As glaciers retreat faster than ever in the modern era, the ground is revealing both the lost worlds of the Vikings and a mirror to our own uncertainties. Ancient fields and settlements, sealed for centuries by ice, are resurfacing, sometimes so quickly that archaeologists barely have time to document what appears before it vanishes again. What happened to the Vikings isn't just ancient history. Across the world, communities today face floods, droughts, and changing seasons, echoes of challenges the Norse once faced. These discoveries aren't just relics. They are reminders of how swiftly stability can be undone. Across Norway and Greenland, research teams have found fences still tracing the shape of vanished pastures, hoofprints pressed into thawed earth, and tools lying exactly where they were last set down. These scenes, frozen in time, suggest the suddenness with which life can change when climate tips the balance. The food shortages, migration, and loss of connection that marked the Vikings' decline are challenges echoed in parts of our world today. Coastal villages threatened by rising seas, farmers grappling with new droughts, and communities tested by a changing environment. Scientific studies now link Viking hardship to shifts in temperature and weather patterns, lessons that have become all the more urgent as we witness similar patterns repeating. The past isn't just something to be uncovered, it's a guide and a warning. What happened to the Norse shows how deeply our fate can be tied to the climate's rhythm. As we uncover more from beneath the melting ice,
the questions grow sharper. How will we adapt? And what will future generations find of us? The answers, written in both ancient soil and modern headlines, may be closer than we think. And if you're curious how other ancient civilizations faced similar turning points and sometimes solved them in ingenious ways, I explored those stories in Secrets of the Ancient World, Mysteries, Technologies, and Lost Civilizations. The link's in the pinned comment.
As glaciers shrink and new ground is exposed each summer, archaeologists are equipped with tools that make this era unlike any before. High-resolution satellite images, drones mapping from above, and ground-penetrating radar now allow researchers to scan vast, rugged landscapes for clues hidden just below the surface. With these technologies, ancient Viking roads, field systems, and settlements, once invisible beneath layers of snow and rock, are traced and documented in stunning detail. When teams arrive on site, they often find objects revealed by the first melt of the season. Sled runners, leather mittens, lengths of rope, and hunting skis are found lying where they were last used, sometimes dropped by travelers caught in sudden storms or lost during a hurried migration. Some items still bear the marks of daily life: the curve of a child's shoe, the patterned knit of a woolen cap, or the careful bindings on a hunting arrow. These finds are preserved with astonishing clarity, the ice having sealed out decay for centuries. Following ancient trails, researchers have mapped the movement of people and animals across the landscape, discovering how Viking communities navigated shifting ice and changing seasons. Field systems and boat landings show how settlements expanded and adapted year by year. As more ice recedes, every new discovery helps to fill in gaps in the Viking story: where they lived, how they traveled, what they carried, and even what they left behind. Technology is not just speeding up the search, it is connecting us more closely to the everyday lives of people who faced a world in flux. As artifacts emerge from the thaw, they bring us face to face with the ingenuity, resilience, and humanity that defined the Viking experience.
Each season, as glaciers melt and new discoveries surface, the race to preserve our shared heritage grows more urgent. The same warmth that frees Viking artifacts from their icy graves threatens to destroy them the moment they are exposed. Leather, wood, and even metal can vanish in a single summer if not quickly rescued and cared for. Archaeologists and conservators now work with local communities, not just to recover objects, but to record the context of each find before it's lost forever. Across Scandinavia and Greenland, the people living near these sites have become unexpected stewards of history. Farmers and hikers are often the first to spot something new in the melting fields: a wooden tool, a fragment of cloth, or the outline of a long-forgotten structure. With every call to a museum or university, more of the story is saved. International teams join in, sharing expertise to stabilize fragile objects and keep them from dissolving into memory. Preservation isn't just about storing relics behind glass. When the world sees a Viking comb or farming tool that has survived 1,000 years of ice, it's a reminder of how fleeting even the greatest cultures can be. Imagine if your own family's story could vanish overnight. What would you want future generations to remember? The urgency of conservation underscores how environmental change puts not only the past at risk, but also the stories and lessons we might carry forward. Protecting these discoveries is an act of respect for the people who once lived at the edge of the world and for the future generations who may learn from their triumphs and hardships. The melting ice calls us not only to remember, but to act, ensuring that what we find today can inspire wonder and understanding tomorrow. The story of the Vikings was long silent, locked beneath layers of ice and myth. Now, new discoveries are rewriting that story, right before our eyes. At the start of this journey, we promised a single artifact that would change everything. When archaeologists opened a wooden box, preserved in a Norwegian glacier for 1,000 years, they didn't find treasure or weaponry, but a small bundle of seeds. carefully wrapped and carried across a continent by a Norse farmer. This quiet discovery speaks volumes. In those seeds was hope. Hope for a new harvest, a new settlement, a future carved from the raw edge of the world. For so long, the Vikings have been seen as raiders and explorers. But these seeds reveal a people deeply invested in building, adapting, and surviving. Their story isn't just about battles, but about resilience, family, and the faith that life could flourish even as the climate changed around them. As more glaciers recede, more stories are being revealed, some that challenge what we thought we knew, and others that draw us closer to the day-to-day dreams and struggles of the past. The choices the Vikings made in the face of change echo powerfully today, reminding us that adaptation, community, and hope can shape history as surely as swords and ships. So what will archaeologists find when they look back at us? The choices we make now could be the next chapter, written in ice or in stone. Let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. If this journey fascinated you, give us a like, subscribe to Armchair Archaeology, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next discovery. Until next time, keep exploring, because history is always waiting just beneath the surface.